I wish we had more of this, or we did more of that, or we didn't do any of this. As uncomfortable as those conversations are, or can be, they're still easier than divorce.
Yeah.
We've said many times, partly because we're in our 40s. Like, I can't imagine being out there, whatever the heck out there even means, like trying to like find someone else. Like, I can't imagine what that would even look like at this.
No.
But I know it would be harder than having the conversations that I sometimes just don't want to have.
Welcome back to another episode of the Crosspoint Podcast, where we help you apply Sunday morning learning to Monday morning living as we connect others to the love of Jesus and help them live on gospel mission. If this podcast is a blessing to you, go ahead and subscribe so that you can get a notification each time a new episode comes out. And please share this episode with anyone that you think it could encourage or challenge. My name is Brianna, and I am joined by Bill and Hannah Massey. Say hello, guys.
Thanks for having us on.
Yeah.
Yes,
Thank you.
thanks.
Thanks for having us back.
Yes, thank you for coming back. So it's awesome to have you guys for 2 weeks in a row. Really great. Awesome. So yeah, we are just going to dive into it. Today's sermon was for sure a heavy hitter. So we have lots to talk about. But before we dive in, first off, thank you guys for joining us last week. Really great to have you guys back. And actually kind of want to give some space to kind of hear a little bit more from you guys on like, how did you meet? How long have you been married? Yeah, some fun stuff.
So we've been married 21 years. It'll be 22 in December. And I met Bill. I was friends with his sister. She had moved to my school when we were in middle school, and we became good friends and good friends in middle school, best friends in high school. And it wasn't until I don't think I actually met him until after we were already graduated.
Yeah.
Because they went to different schools, and we hadn't met, but it was like after we graduated that we met, and
The pool party. We met at the pool party.
Yes, we met her.
She was 18.
Yes.
So a few months before we graduated.
Yes, that's true. Yeah. But a little while after that, she was just really on us both. I didn't know that at the time. But she kept telling me, like, I think you should date my brother. You should date my brother. And
She was persistent.
yes,
Yeah.
she was. Yeah. So she had me actually just come over and hang out one night after, because I would have, I think I had a late college class, and then I would come and hang out at her house. And it just so happened that her brother happened to be there too. And I remember looking at her, and she just kind of gave me this little mischievous smile, like, whoops. And I don't know, was it the next? I don't know. We went out on a date with her and her husband.
It's a horrible movie.
And then, but that was it. We were together ever since, and we got married within the year.
Wow.
That December, because we went out. Our first date was in February, and we were married by that December.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Oh, well, yeah, your sister, like that, well, what a blessing, right?
She was persistent, yeah.
That's awesome.
She knew what she wanted, and she made it happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is really awesome. Very fun. Well, thanks for sharing. So as I mentioned, today's sermon for sure was a heavy hitter. We talked a lot about like protecting marriage this week. And yeah, Pastor Brennan, he talked about like a lot of good and practical things to help like safeguard and protect a marriage. And one of the things he talked a lot about was boundaries. And he kind of made a case from up front as to like why boundaries are important. And he even mentioned, some of the boundaries that he has within his marriage, and people maybe looking at him and being like, oh, that's so excessive, right? So I kind of want to give you guys space of like kind of just from your vantage point too, like why is it so important? Before we even talk about the practicals of like boundaries that you guys have put in place in your marriage, like why are boundaries so important from your perspective?
Yeah, I'll take that one. I think boundaries are there to protect us, right? Well, he called them hedges in the sermon series, or the sermon today. I also can think of them as like guardrails. The point of a guardrail is to keep you from going off a cliff. And so you put guardrails in your marriage that ensure that as you're going down the road of life, you're not going into the cliff. And even if you bang into the guardrail, if you think of where guardrails are positioned, they're in safe places on the highway, right? And so it's inconvenient if you bump into a guardrail sometimes, but you're not going in the ditch. And so all that to say, like the why behind them is when you have something worth protecting, you protect it, and you build a hedge around it. And so I would say maybe two reasons, two whys for me. I never want Hannah to think she's competing, really with anything. Like that's the end of the sentence. I don't want Hannah to think she's competing ever. That there's something that she's got to get in front of. But also for our kids, right? Like we want our kids to know that hey, they're clearly our kids are clearly the children of two sinners. They're raised by sinners, but they are raised by sinners who deeply value their marriage, and I don't want that to be. Life will give them enough stuff to worry about, and so and we fight. It happens, but we don't want our kids to ever have to worry about whether our marriage is in jeopardy because someone or something else has crept in and taken precedence.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. So I guess like what has that looked like for you guys in terms of like boundaries that you have set in place in your marriage? So that you, like you said, you're prioritizing Hannah and she's not feel like she's competing with anything or anyone. And your kids know like, okay, we're in this. Like what are some practical boundaries you guys have put in place?
So one thing that comes to mind is nothing that we have is password protected. And we live in a time where like you have to have passwords for everything. And I am terrible with my passwords.
Yes.
But the kids see that like living out, like, he'll use my phone for something but we are, like we share our passwords, but in saying that, we never know what any of the passwords are. So it's always first like, okay, what was that one again? But they will see that lived out. Like there's nothing that we don't show each other. We can get into our emails or phones, texts, social media, whatever, that like nothing's off limits, and they see that.
Yeah, you don't have any passwords. I don't know. Except for when you forget them.
Yeah, or we figure it out together. But
yeah,
but there's nothing that's hidden.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, go ahead.
I think on those lines also with digital stuff is we don't communicate digitally with the opposite sex unless there's a third person present digitally. And so I know I really appreciated that when Brendan teed this up today. He said, "Some of you are going to think I'm some crazy conservative Amish person." Okay, and so it's not uncommon, if one of us gets a text from someone from the opposite sex, it's benign, not accusing anyone trying to be inappropriate. You should probably get back to that in a second, like with the point of boundaries, but our response is going to be a response with the third, like with our spouse pulled into the conversation. We just don't. We just don't go there, and we never have. Whether it's an email or a text message, social media, but we really don't use social media very much. Neither of us do.
We don't, but it has become habit to like, if I should get a text or an email, like whatever it is, and I reply back, I'm putting my husband's email or phone number in there, and so it adds, him to the conversation. And we have just become used to that. And like, sometimes we don't even read them necessarily.
No.
But it's just that safeguard that there's nothing being said that we are not comfortable with the other one hearing or seeing.
Yeah. I think it's important to point out that like, it's not about assuming anyone's intentions, like our spouses or a third party. We're not assuming anyone's intending to do anything wrong. Some people may, but that's not all the point. The point is more about appearances. That it's a core Christian concept that we want to avoid even the appearance of evil. And so it doesn't even look like we're trying to do anything wrong. We were kind of chatting about making some notes for this this podcast. We were talking about the why behind it of if we live in a fallen world, and so there are certainly going to be some people out there who have less than pure motives, and so, and when that's the case, they're looking for any kind of a little thread that they can pull on to turn into a flirt or take a conversation, and hook it in a different direction than it ever intended to go. Well, it's really hard to do that when the spouse is a part of the conversation.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, we just don't communicate with the opposite sex unless there's, a third person part of the conversation. For work, I don't ride alone in a vehicle with someone, not just work, just in general, but I don't ride alone in a vehicle with someone from the opposite sex. When I work with someone of the opposite sex, which happens, I mean, it's very common in the workplace. There's nothing wrong with that at all. But when that does happen, I'm pretty deliberate, probably to the point of being annoying.
Yes.
That I talk about my wife. I bring her up frequently in conversations, just to make clear what my priorities are. And again, I am under no delusion that people at work are trying to turn things into something that's less than honorable. But it's just become really second nature to talk about my wife often, early and often, as we would say in the Air Force, early and often.
We are just always upfront about our relationship and that it's like the most important to us. And so we make it a point to be vocal about how we value the other one.
Yeah. I think another one that may be kind of controversial sometimes is, is it possible to have a friend who's of the opposite sex? And our position is no. Does not at all mean you can't be friendly. But even friendly has boundaries, because there's going to be people who want to take things a different direction. And so we try not to provide any kind of a foothold for that. But it just in the world that we live in, we just don't see it possible to maintain opposite sex friendships independently of your spouse. We have a few couples that we're extremely close to, extremely close. They know our dirty mail, and they're the ones that we call when we have problems. And I'm very much friends with the husband and the wife. But that's different. That's in context. It's very different.
Well, but there's still boundaries. There's still things that
yeah, that's true.
Only her and I will talk about and only the husbands will talk about. And because we were talking about this yesterday when we were kind of preparing and saying I don't ever talk to him on the phone, and my husband doesn't ever talk to the other wife on the phone. It just doesn't happen. But we do consider the four of us friends, but yeah, we'll just have those boundaries.
Yeah. Those are very, very practical boundaries. They're ones that maybe sometimes, people you just don't think about, especially maybe entering into a marriage, you're like a newlywed couple. And I kind of wanted to ask you guys the question of how do couples start building boundaries? I guess what did that look like for you guys? When did you guys start implementing boundaries into your marriage? Was it something that you did from the jump? What has that looked like? And I guess what could it look like for others?
Yeah.
I would say we did not do it from the beginning. Honestly, I don't know that it was on our radar at all as to, because we had went through premarital counseling, but I know I personally did not feel prepared. No. We have said before, if we could write some premarital counseling, curriculum, it would be more practical, things that you're actually going to face. This was probably maybe a year and a half in that I first heard someone talk about it. And she was a Christian woman, and she was sharing the one rule her and her husband had. And I know for me, that's what kind of got me started of that sounds like a good idea. But I don't know. I still, even from thinking of that, I don't know exactly when we started talking about it.
No, I me neither. I can't give a time and a date. I do remember contextually, as it started looking like we were going to be doing more vocational ministry, that became part of the conversation. Because if you're in ministry, you work off of your reputation, and accusations don't have to remotely be true; they just have to be made. And so we wanted to be very deliberate about protecting, our reputation. One, so that if God saw fit, He could continue using us to do ministry. But then also, and I can't say there was like a specific, we sat down and there was this revelation like, okay, it's time to start making these boundaries. But I do know the boundaries became more important as we started having kids, because you also want to protect, your kids' minds and your reputation in front of your kids. And so, I can't give a time and a place, but I think as we started to mature enough to know that there was things worth protecting. You don't think of that when you're 18, 19, 20. But when you start realizing, hey, we have some stuff that's worth protecting here. Our reputation, our marriage for sure, but you just don't think of it that clearly when you're younger. But it was really more organic.
Yeah, having kids put things in perspective, but also serving in a church. And I know like some things just kind of evolved from starting to serve in a church, because you have people stopping by your house. And I know that became one, like if my husband was at home, then someone of the opposite sex was not invited in. It's like, oh, I'm going to go out into the yard and chat with you. And again, not looking into intentions at all. It was just avoiding the appearance of evil, avoiding, it looking bad. So that's one that just kind of evolved from beginning to serve in a church, and people knowing where you live and stopping by.
And no problem using the fact that they know where you live.
Yeah.
I think it's probably, Brianna, worth bringing up now at this point that like when you go to build boundaries, you're really just deciding what criticism you want to open yourself up to.
That's good.
It's going to happen regardless. And so we clearly didn't want the criticism to be that, our marriage was susceptible, to anything. But so when we say I'm not going to ride alone with the female, or she's not going to invite someone to the house unless I'm home, well, that exposes us to a different set of criticisms. And so I would say if you listen to this as I don't care, single person, young person, not young person, you're probably, I hope you are thinking like, wow, if I do those things, then I can't do these things. Yeah. Yeah, there's just no way around that. And so there may be certain projects, careers, relationships that are just not going to be on the table as a result of your boundaries. But it's a trade-off, right? And it's just a trade-off that you're going to be exposed to criticism regardless. And so it's really trying to maturely on the front end decide, what do I want? What kind of criticism do I want to expose my relationship with my spouse to?
Yeah. No, that's so good. And even when we were preparing, you used this phrase of like counting the costs. We talked a bit about like Billy Graham and the Billy Graham rule, and how he, had a hard and fast rule. He was never going to be alone with a woman at any time that wasn't his wife, like not in the presence of others. And how people kind of viewed him as excessive. And that was decades ago. People thought that was excessive. So
it could be toxic now.
Yeah, nowadays, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Ooh, just get beyond criticism, right? But I really like how you just said that of like, either way, you're going to be open to criticism, but what type of criticism do you want?
Yeah.
Do you want the criticism of like, oh, you're a prude or you're too excessive? Or do you want the criticism of like, ooh, I saw so-and-so over so-and-so's house. Wonder if something's going over there. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's better forms of criticism than others, Yeah. And it's not to the point that we just put these boundaries in place just because we care what other people think, but we ultimately care what the Lord thinks too. And like one of you guys mentioned, like we want to even avoid the appearance of evil. So at the end of the day, it's not even just about us, but it's about the Lord. Like we represent Christ too. So you represent your spouse, you represent Christ, your family, yourself. There's a lot on the table that really matters.
Yeah. There is, and you have to choose your hard, because either way you go, it's going to be a difficult road.
Yep.
So, you're going to care what other people think. well, that's going to be hard too, because it's going to make things, could potentially make things difficult in your marriage. Or are you going to, honor God and then honor your spouse by making some, boundaries that are maybe not so popular. So
Yeah.
Choose your heart. I like that. It's good.
Yeah, that is
Very
good.
wisdomous.
Yeah, people are always gonna have something to say, so
Yeah.
don't give them something to say.
yeah.
That's what I
Yep.
grew up hearing that.
Yeah.
So we're gonna pivot a little bit, but very much still related, because Pastor Brennan even referenced this from up front of like boundaries within marriage for married couples, right? But even like for like singles, right? So whether you're younger single or older single or single again, right? It's you're not like immune as well to having like these hedges and boundaries as well. And myself, like being like single, like this is something I think about often. Conversations I have often with like the girls that I disciple or like friends. So I'm constantly thinking about these things, recognizing that it's not common when you're single to always be thinking about boundaries, because sometimes people view this as like, oh, these are your free years to do whatever you want. And I'm like, super dangy. Let's not go there. So I kind of wanted to ask you guys, especially having been married for 21 years. Yeah, 21 years. I'm going on 22. Love that. Tries to impale her with a pen. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, so having been married for so long, kind of like looking back, what is some of the advice or I guess, encouragement you would tell your younger self when you were single regarding boundaries as a single person? Like things that you maybe would have put in place, or just the case that you would have made for yourself about like boundaries being important even while you're single.
Yeah. That's good. Partly because one of the reasons it's good, but I mean convicting, because it wasn't stuff I was thinking about when I was younger, not even remotely. So I guess I should say that first to avoid being a hypocrite, to say like, yeah, sure, certainly I have some things that young people should consider, but I'm not saying that from a position of like I did this well, when I was 17 or 18. But I would say maybe the first case to make is that boundaries preserve options. And I made a quick note when you said it's not common to have boundaries or think about boundaries as a single person today. It's not. You're right. But I'll tell you what else isn't common is a good marriage. It's just not. And so, when I think of the critiques thrown at people like Billy Graham, I always think, sure, he's being criticized for not riding in a car with a female or whatever. But Billy knows who he's going home with. And Billy knows he's going home to a good marriage. And that's just playing the long game, And so I think if you're single again, and you're navigating through that season of life, keep in mind that boundaries preserve options. And so consider what you want your preferred future to look like. And be wise enough to admit that that's not going to happen on accident.
That's good.
That's not just you're not going to be victimized with a great future. Like, you have to build toward that.
Yeah.
And you build toward that by building boundaries. And I think maybe a second thing I would throw into that conversation is there's no way at 18 or 23 I was 23 when we got married.
You were. Yeah, I was 20.
There's no way you could have told me that marriage was going to be this good. And if you haven't listened to last week's episode, listen to last week's episode, because we're not on here saying that we've had a perfect marriage.
No.
That's the opposite. Listen to last week's episode. But it's great now. It's phenomenal. It's phenomenal now. But I could not have foresaw how good marriage could become. And because of that, I think, wow, I'm glad that while we made plenty of mistakes and plenty of bad decisions, we didn't make bad decisions that were fatal to our marriage. And boundaries eventually helped us, once we started talking about boundaries, kind of get to that point. But I don't know if I'm answering your question or not.
No, yeah, for sure. Yeah.
I would say I was not thinking this way either. I wish I would have been. I wish I would have been more intentional. So I think you have this this feeling when you're younger that like the choices you make are not necessarily going to impact you, when you're an old married person. But well, because you view your life in these like segments but it does matter. And I would have been much more intentional with boundaries and safeguards before I was married, in preparation to be married, before I even met him. So I would say that to single people, like it does matter. Yeah. And what you're doing now, even when it doesn't feel like it, is actually preparing you for your future. And the less baggage that you take into that, the better. So.
Yeah. That's so good. Guys, write this down. I really like what you're using the illustration of like guardrails. And I had a coworker years ago who kind of described it similarly, where if you view like relationship or just, can be sexual purity, wholeness, all of that stuff in terms of boundaries. If you view it as like red lights and yellow lights, she said, the boundaries you want to make them yellow lights. Because often what, I'll speak for single people, we do is we make them red lights. Like, what's the big red light? Like, oh, I'm just not going to have sex with my significant other. It's like, okay, that's a great boundary to have, right? If you're trying to honor Christ. However, if that's like your only boundary, that's the red light. Normally when I'm driving down the road, if I tell myself I'm never going to drive through a red light, I'm probably going to drive through some red lights, right? But if I tell myself I'm never going to drive through a yellow light, I might blow through some yellow lights, but I won't ever get to the point where I'm blowing through red lights,
Good.
Yeah.
So if my only standard in, a relationship is like, oh, I'm just not going to be physically intimate with a boyfriend, right? There's going to need to be some other boundaries ahead of that, because you don't just get to that place in isolation. There's things that like lead up to it, right? So even as a single person, like listening to you guys too, like, I'm like right in step with you guys in terms of like how important it is to have boundaries even when you're single, because oftentimes, again, people view singleness as like, oh, you're free to do whatever you want. Like, this is a season of your life, get it all out now before you're married, before the ball and chain comes. And I'm like, that's such a poor way to view things. And even to, I guess, if it's helpful for any listeners, like some practical boundaries that like I've developed through the years, right?
Yeah.
Having conversations with friends and just people that have discipled me and things like that. So one practical boundary that I have, whether I'm dating or I just have like a friend, like I'm not going to anyone's house alone. Any invitation of like, oh, do you want to hang out? Sure, where are we going? Starbucks. Which Starbucks? That one or that one? You know what I'm saying? Like, we're going to hang out in public where there's people around. Or if it is in a home environment, like who's in your house as well? Is it roommates that are around? Is it your family? Like, visibility is very helpful, right? And I remember talking to someone and them thinking that was such an extreme prudish type of boundary to have. And I'm like, oh, you just think you're holier than thou. It's like, actually, I think I'm weaker than thou. Yeah. Like, boundaries aren't because you think you're this great person, you're just trying to attain like a level of righteousness. It's actually because I realize I'm a sinner that's prone to sin and wander. And like, I need practical things to put in place so that I don't put myself in a position to give into my flesh.
Yes.
So that's one boundary I have. Another one is, again, those like physical boundaries of like, okay, like not going to be physically intimate, right? But like there's things that like lead up to just, being physically intimate. So that one, definitely spend some time with the Lord talking about that one, because I know some people that are like, oh, like it's fine to maybe like kiss within like dating or something. And some people are like, I can't handle that. I can't do that, right? So like knowing like where you're tempted to fall. Or which just wise. Sometimes if you're like, I'm not tempted in that way, but it's just wise still not to entertain those things. Put those boundaries in place anyway. Because like you said, what's going to be the harm down the road? Nothing. Really. Yeah. It only benefits, right? Another one, this one feels a little bit, this one's pretty cool, is like emotional vulnerability as well. Where, I mean, I think now our culture is very much like into like bearing your heart and your soul to everybody and being your most authentic self. Even on social media for strangers, I'm just like, oh, we
know too much about each other.
We do. We know way too much about each other. Yeah. And I think within relationships, like dating and stuff, there's appropriate, especially if it's heading towards marriage, obviously, like there's appropriate levels by which you're divulging very intimate things and having intimate conversations. Some conversations are best had in the company of others, maybe like disciples or people that are discipling you towards marriage and things. But I know, and I'll say I'm guilty of it myself too, sometimes like having very like emotional conversations or levels of vulnerability where the relationship isn't at that point. It doesn't have that foundation to sustain it. It's not even necessary to have those type of things. And sometimes when you have like the emotional vulnerability, like you better be careful, because like that's when oftentimes like more of like the like romantic or physical vulnerabilities can come, you know, because you feel like you know a person maybe in a way that you really don't. And then I don't know some other things too, and Pastor Brennan talked a lot about this, is like pornography. We could have a whole podcast just talking about pornography, honestly. But again, I think a lot of sometimes single people view singleness as an opportunity. Like for instance, you know, say someone is trying to pursue, not sleeping with others before they get married. So they make the case, well, at least I'll do pornography. I'll do that. I'm not hurting anyone. That's a way to keep me from acting it out or something like that. But really just talking about how like God desires like purity and holiness and like wholeness. Like that's what Christ died for, to give us that, right? And yeah, sometimes within singleness, we can kind of like minimize how important it is to pursue like sexual purity and wholeness, because we're like, well, especially if maybe you get stuck in the rabbit hole of like, God's not giving me a righteous way to fulfill these desires, so I'm going to like settle to fulfill them in self-gratification. But no, that needs to be a huge boundary that we say no to, right? Because not only is it detrimental for like a future marriage, but it's detrimental in the here and the now. He was talking about like what like the effects of pornography like on our brains, and I have a lot of conversations with like students about this and friends, and also just like your own walk with Jesus. It's just so important. So I don't know if you wanted to add something or.
No, that's good stuff. Yeah.
So those are just like a few personally that like I probably have plenty more. And sometimes I've gotten people that'll call me like a prude, or like guys that are like, oh, you're mean. I'm like, I'm actually not. I'm actually a pretty nice person. But I'm not going to like interact with you maybe in some ways that you want like other women to, you know. But again, I really like what you said too, of like having those boundaries helps you preserve options in the future, right? And ultimately it's like I'm not even doing these. I've gotten to a point where I'm not even doing these for the sake of like, oh, this is like recipe for a great marriage in the future. But it's like, this is a recipe for like growing in Christ likeness now, which is going to be a blessing for a marriage in the future. I'm sure the Lord provide it. So
yeah, good stuff.
But yeah. So, all right. So now we're going to pivot a little bit and talk about, Pastor Brennan, another part of the sermon was talking about like infidelity and just like the pain of, couples walking through just unfaithfulness, right? And, we heard from up front how like communication is very key in the midst of, having healthy, good communication is key in the midst of like safeguarding even against like infidelity, future infidelity, because it can safeguard against things like misunderstanding or resentment against your spouse. It can help in the midst of like sometimes that emotional or physical drift within a marriage, like healthy communication can. So I kind of wanted to ask you guys, like how, I know it's not easy, just even from outsider looking in, right? I know it's not easy working towards healthy communication, but like, what does it look like to communicate honestly and receive humbly from your spouse? Maybe those things that you don't like about each other or ways that you rubbed each other wrong in the here and the now. So that way it's not creating these footholds in the future for like drifting and whatnot.
Yeah. It is not always easy, and we have not always handled it well. I would say we have gotten much better. And we have learned a lot about each other in 20 years. And what works for us is we communicate to the point of annoyance. We will talk things out until like it is for sure settled. So we may have to have the conversation 3 or 4 times. And one way that we complement each other is it's not always the same person like driving those conversations. And some, we'll go through a period where he's driving a lot of the conversations. And it's not that the other one is like not cooperating. It's just, I don't know.
They're not feeling it.
No. And so God has blessed us that way. Like we kind of will carry the other through some of that, like, okay, we need to talk about this. And sometimes it's, eye roll and, oh my goodness, we've already talked about this. And like, yeah, but there's still some resentment or some misunderstanding, or we're not getting through this whatever topic. And so, yeah, we need to talk about it again. And so for us, and we had mentioned this last week, is that one thing that we will sometimes even say to each other is, I am on your side. And just like saying that out loud and reminding both of us really that we are working toward the same goal, even if it doesn't feel like that. Mm-hmm. And we have gotten much better about talking through things with truth and love. Mm. And again, I mean, we're both sinners, so it's not always perfect. Sometimes, if we're hurt, we'll be a little more stabby with our words. But we try to listen to the other person, and hear what they're saying and not just hear their emotion, and remind ourselves, when we're hearing it, like, I want what's best for them. And in doing that, I know for me, it will kind of help soften my heart and like listen to what he's saying and not just feel attacked, or because we can tend to feel sorry for ourselves and, I'm trying so hard and it's never right. And that's not true. It's just, you have two sinners who are living day in and day out, year after year, and you tend to rub each other the wrong way sometimes. And you go through ups and downs, and there's some seasons where it's just, you're having these conversations all the time. And then there's some seasons where we're just like sailing along and, there's not as many conversations, or they're always different and they're not, on repeat. But that's one thing for us that helps us not build resentment and misunderstanding, and just like the not knowing where the other one is we keep talking, keep communication open.
I think you're better at that than I am at reminding me, like, the conversation needs to happen, and just for some transparency, more than once I've said, I don't want to talk about this. I don't want to talk about this. And always loving, sometimes even kind. You'll reply with, okay, Bill, but it's a problem. So, and just kind of bring me back to like the common sense of want has nothing to do with it. Like it's an issue. And so now or later, but it needs to be discussed. And you're much better at reminding me, like, this needs to be processed. We need to talk about it. Yeah, I think another thing on the communication piece is thinking earlier about when you said choose your hard, that we have often said to each other, to our kids, like our healthy marriage now is a reward in part for our obedience in the early years. That God's, like, feelings catch up to obedience. And so you do stuff you don't feel like doing, which really is kind of like the essence of adulthood, right? Like like my 10-year-old may not want to do his chores, but he's 10 and he's got to do them, So feelings catch up to obedience, and so eventually, like that obedience lays the groundwork for a rewarding marriage. That's just not. It's not going to be there in the early years. It's just not. It's just not. It's not going to be there in there because you don't know each other. You don't know yourself. Yeah. Well enough, for that to be there. But to stick with that in the context of communication, I think it's important for couples, and this is not always easy to do, but to sit down and say, hey, it's going this way. I'd rather it go this way. And I'm not giving examples deliberately because that can just fit into so many different categories of life that I wish we had more of this, or we did more of that, or we didn't do any of this. As uncomfortable as those conversations are or can be, they're still easier than divorce. Yeah. We've said many times, partly because we're in our 40s, like, I can't imagine being out there, whatever the heck out there even means, like trying to like find someone else. Like, I can't imagine what that would even look like. No. But I know it would be harder than having the conversations that I sometimes just don't want to have.
Yeah, that's something
Yeah.
my dad has always said, and like even I'll speak for being single. I'm like, dang, like going through it one time is brutal enough. Dating, why did you go through it a second time? You know, so yeah, but yeah, is there anything you wanted to add or like captured it?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm good.
Yeah, and I kind of even want to give an encouragement to what you guys said, like related to, yeah, like having those hard conversations and being willing to have those hard conversations. And even with, you know, just talking about like some of the singleness stuff, just like boundaries in general, and like doing the hard work. Like if anyone's listening that feels discouraged of like, hey, like I wasn't obedient in the early part of my marriage. I'm not reaping the rewards. I'm reaping, you know, the fruit of the disobedience now, or like, hey, like I haven't always pursued sexual wholeness and purity, or hey, like I still am involved in like, you know, viewing pornography or at full blown addiction. Like it's, no one is too far gone at all, actually. Like the gospel,
Oh, no.
you can never outrun the grace of God, never outrun the love of God, never outrun the power of the cross. So just like hear us, like as we're sharing these things, none of this is like condemnation. None of this is, if you haven't done these things, whoop, it's over for you.
No.
It's like, hey,
No,
like
not at all.
today's a new day. Tomorrow's a new day. It's always time to like, yeah, behold the gospel afresh and like see the power of God change things, you know, and there are practical steps we'll have to take in the midst of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So kind of talking about the gospel, kind of wanted to, yeah, kind of finish it out, just beholding the beauty of and the power of the gospel message. And I wanted to ask you guys like kind of like a twofold question. First, you know, how has your understanding of the gospel deepened through, you know, your experience of being married to each other, realizing, hey, I need to set these boundaries, you know, and maybe even as you guys do life with other couples, seeing marriages restored in the midst of things like infidelity. So I'll ask that first. Like, how has your understanding of the gospel deepened as you guys have walked through your own marriage, or maybe walk with others that have gone through hard things in their marriage?
Yeah. So can I jump on that one? Mm-hmm. Before I do, I want to touch just for a second on what you said a minute ago about there's, Lord willing, people listening. They were like, I wasn't faithful in the early years or whatever. I want to this is just pastorally to kind of speak to them for a second. I was thinking of Martin Luther when you said that. Mm-hmm. And Martin Luther, one of the many brilliant things Luther said was, if I knew the world was going to end tomorrow, I would still plant a tree today. And he used that to illustrate that that's just the kind of person I want to be. That like I believe that God is taking what we have and he's making it into something beautiful. And how amazing it is that I get to be a part of that. And so, you know, where God takes things down the road is that's his prerogative, not mine. But my obedience is what's in front of me. And if I'm called to plant a tree, I'm planting that tree. And so, you know, if you want an oak tree, the best time to plant an oak tree is 40 years ago. The second best time is today.
That's good.
You know, and so if that's where you find yourself, that's where you find yourself. So plant the tree. Plant the tree. But yeah, so how's our marriage helped my understanding of the gospel? So if the gospel in a nutshell is you're far worse than you could imagine, and God is far better than you could comprehend. And it is. That's the gospel, right? Like, hey, good news, you're worse than you even think. And even better news, God loves you more than you realize. And I look back on 21 years, and we are married in spite of ourselves. Is that fair?
Yes.
We're married in spite of ourselves. Of God knowing that he was taking our marriage somewhere that we couldn't take it. And with an incredible, divine amount of patience, him steering us where he wanted us to go regardless. And so, like lest we even remotely sound prideful, you know, that the gospel has got to come up in this conversation. Like we're sitting here not as a testament to our obedience, because I don't want to live in that world. We're sitting here as a testament to God's faithfulness and his willingness to, you really shouldn't have done that or any of that, but let's keep moving. And that's been the gospel for us.
That's good. Yeah. And in light of that, like, how does the gospel empower and encourage you guys to like live these things out? Like to live out that obedience, to pursue one another always.
So I'm thinking of like, you know, when you fight with anybody, but especially your spouse, you want your spouse to evaluate you based off of your intentions You know, I'm going like, well, you evaluate your spouse based off of their actions.
That's good.
You know, and you say like, well, this is, yes, that's what I said, but you know what I meant. That's what I say when I'm on the hook. But when it's the other way around, it's like, yeah, I don't care what you meant. That's not what you said.
Wow.
The gospel says, what are you doing? Like, really? You want God to deal with you that way? Well, that's the end of that conversation. You know, no, of course I don't. And so it's on my better days, it's a reminder that if fights end when forgiveness begins, then the gospel helps us get to forgiveness quicker. Because I don't want God prolonging his forgiveness of me. And I'm a sinner. And so there's times I'm like, I just want to stew in this for a while, you know. Okay, how's that working for you? How about the gospel instead?
That's good. That's really good. Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for sharing.
Yeah.
I think
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, of course. I think this would be a great place to kind of just like pray for our listeners. Would you mind closing us in some prayer?
Not at all. Not
Thanks.
at all. Lord, thank you for the just the ministry of Fellowship Crosspoint and for Brianna's faithfulness to get on here and just kind of walk us through the message. I thank you for the weekly faithfulness Pastor Brennan has just to step into the crosshairs and speak truth and love to a world that desperately needs it. I pray that this series has been a blessing to couples, to singles, to single again. However you see fit to use it, I pray you would do so, and that we would just be just pawns on your chessboard that you use and put in place however you see fit to bring people closer to your son, Jesus. I thank you for our marriage. I thank you for 21 years and counting of doing life with my best friend in every sense of the word. This amazing person that said she was going to wear my ring over 2 decades ago and has kept it on ever since. I thank you for that. Pray that you would help us lean into each other more every day, and you would use our love to be a blessing to others as well. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. So thank you everyone for listening. We pray that you seek Christ with your whole heart and that you have a great rest of your week. All right. See you later.
Thanks.